Everyone has nostalgia, whether it's for a place, a time, a person. It's always been hard to put into words certain nostalgic feelings for me. Everyone always mentions specific cartoons that bring them nostalgia, and I'm definitely the same way, but for me, it's a little bit more than that. Today, I'm going to try and explain one of those feelings with Cartoon Network's Suburban Aesthetic.
Oh, it seems I've locked my keys in the car.
That is serious. Jeez!
Hey, it's Ali. Today this video is going to be a little different. Today I'm going to talk about 3 different Cartoon Network shows that I believe are the perfect antithesis. Did I use that correctly? Anyway, of the Suburban Aesthetic, I'm going to be showcasing Ed, and Eddie, Clarence, and Craig of the Creek. You may notice this video is a different style than my others, and that's for a couple of reasons. Number one, I just moved, which is great, and you already saw that video, but my room is a complete mess. I know at the end of that video, you saw my room like sort of put together, but then things happened, and now my room's a mess again, so I can't film in it right now. Also, I'm going to try to get a new camera, like a proper camera, because y'all know I've been filming on my phone. We're trying to upgrade in these streets, so for now we're just filming like this. You get to look at pretty b-roll. And also, this is something new. These video essays are something completely new that I'm like trying out for the first time, so if you like them, please let me know. Give it a like and comment, so I know that I can keep making more. I mean, I'm probably gonna make more anyway, but your support is very much so welcome. Yeah. Anyway, enjoy. So, what is the Suburban Aesthetic? Or rather, how am I defining the Suburban Aesthetic? If you were a kid in the early 2000s, you probably already know what I'm talking about. Toy commercials, playing outside until your mom tells you to get your ass back inside, the woods, playing in the street, making friends with random ass kids who you'll probably never see again, and rocks. Just like rocks. Like, I don't know why, but rocks were a big part of my childhood. I found a lot when I was like moving out last month. Anyway, if you grew up in suburbia, you probably know what I mean. And TV is not only a really big part of that nostalgia, but practically perpetuated it. I can go into how this probably has to do with the American dream and capitalism and settling down in suburbia and blah blah blah. But no, this isn't a video essay about the fallacy that is the American dream. It's about fucking cartoons. So let's talk about them. Ed, and Eddie was a cartoon, that aired on Cartoon Network from January 4th, 1999 to November 8th, 2009. It had 6 seasons and 69 Ed, and Eddie had 69 episodes. Legend status. Well, those episodes were split into 130 segmented episodes, but still legend status. It was about these 3 boys, Ed with 2 D's, better known as Double D, and Eddie, who go around trying to scam people out of their money to buy jawbreakers, which for some reason was like the god fucking candy in this show. The show takes place in a cul-de-sac, in the suburbs, which for those of you who don't know is like this area at the end of a residential street that is essentially a big ass circle with houses surrounding it. And when I was a kid, that was like the best place to hang out, mostly because it was the safest, because no cars were whizzing by in the streets. And the reason this show was so nostalgic for me, despite the fact that I only watched it occasionally, because most of my friends weren't even allowed to watch it because their parents, I kid you not, would say that it made you dumber. Watching Ed, and Eddie made you dumber. So I didn't, when I was over at my friend's house, I didn't get to watch it a lot, so it is what it is. But getting back on track, the reason why this is so nostalgic for me is because of the freedom that these kids had. This is a major theme in early 2000s cartoon kids shows, which is no parents. You can't even go far back as like Charlie Brown, and the parents are not there really. They're just like these mystical figures that never get any lines and don't even really speak English in the Charlie Brown cartoons. And the reason is you're not supposed to be paying attention to them. You're supposed to be paying attention to the kids, and the kids run everything. Like, the kids in Ed, and Eddie have their own economy. Like, their own economy is going on in these shows. It's kind of genius, honestly, if you think about it. They had their own world, their own power structure, and that power structure is kind of reflected into how we felt we were as kids. Like, of course, we had our parents, and we had to go back to them every day, but for the time period that we were outside hanging with other kids, it was like our own separate world that we ran ourselves, and it's really interesting to see that in shows, and it becomes very nostalgic now. Ed, and Eddie has done such an amazing job in like cementing that kind of kids world where no one else is around. Parents do show up occasionally and you get your occasional consequence, but for the most part, Ed, and Eddie kind of just do their own thing. And when looking back on it, it just makes you long for that time when you could, in theory, do your own thing. I love shows like these, you know, the ones that show how self-run these kids are and how it felt when you were a kid to be in a cul-de-sac and have different power structures. Like, yeah, usually the kids on top were just richer than you and had more money and more toys and more access to things. But like, it still felt cool. And at the peak of when Ed, Edd n Eddy was out, as a small kid looking at this, it made me excited to like go outside and play all day, every day, and just get into shenanigans. I know I kind of glossed over Ed, Edd n Eddy as a show, but as I just mentioned, I was really young when the peak of Ed, Edd n Eddy was on Cartoon Network, and I didn't really get to appreciate it until now. Clarence, on the other hand, came out during the time where I was almost an adult. I was 2014. I wasn't old enough to see everything from a true adult's perspective, so I still enjoyed the show, but I was old enough to where the show provided more of a nostalgic factor than regular entertainment you would get if you were the target demographic for the show. Clarence was a show on Cartoon Network that ran from February 17th, 2014 to June 24th, 2018. Wow, a lot of shows ended that year, huh? R.I.P. Cartoon Network. That's another story for another day. Anyway, it had 3 seasons and also had 130 episodes. The show followed a boy named Clarence and frequently his 2 best friends, Jeff and Sumo, as he gets into shenanigans around his town. Contrast to Ed, Edd n Eddy that took place mostly in one cul-de-sac, Clarence takes place in an entire suburban town. Watching this for the first time in 2014, I was completely entranced by the bomb-ass opening and ending songs of the show. I will never understand how musicians are able to encapsulate entire feelings into music. It's fucking sorcery, I swear. Also, Ed, Edd n Eddy had a bomb-ass intro. I didn't forget. I just feel like the Clarence opening and ending really showcased the aesthetic that I'm talking about. Okay, bye. The loud and high energy opening matches what the show represents perfectly. Childhood, fun, and wonder. The main character, Clarence, is innocent and all he ever wants to do is have fun with his friends around town. The ending also encapsulates this innocence with the ukulele and the children singing about simple childhood things. Like, look at these comments from this lyric video I found. This song is the perfect closer to a show that is able to demonstrate a suburban kid's life so perfectly. I believe that Clarence is the literal human form of childhood wonder and innocence. He finds weird-ass ways to entertain himself and his friends and is seemingly never sad. This show was like the best nostalgia meal your brain could possibly have at the time. It romanticized suburbia in the best ways and reminded you only of the good times you had as a kid. A lot of the people, and me, said that the show was very realistic despite the fact that everything was romanticized. And while the show romanticized suburbia and being a kid, I feel like it also still was very realistic, and I think this is because the other adults had much more prominent role in the show, but were still only the main focal point every now and then. They never overstayed their welcome, and they were mostly either used for comedic relief or to teach kids a lesson. In my opinion, this is better than the early cartoons that just got rid of adults altogether, because it provides a more realistic depiction of what childhood is like looking back on it, and it completes that like missing food group that the other nostalgia meal shows didn't seem to have. A big thing that I loved about Clarence, along with its opening and ending and its charming writing, is its art style. A lot of people were a bit turned off by it at first, and I'm not gonna lie, so was I. But as I watched it, I felt like it was the perfect representation of how a kid might see his peers in the world around him. The colors are very soft, but also somehow vibrant in all the right places. The show is very much supposed to be representative of a coloring book, and I think they perfectly represented that and the feeling of simplicity and innocence that we all have as children. I will forever stand up for how good and artistic Clarence was, not just for a show for kids, but also in providing the perfect aesthetic of childhood suburbia. Pig of the Creek is an ongoing show on Cartoon Network that started on the Cartoon Network app of all fucking devilish places in February of 2018 and moved to TV on March 30th of the same year. It currently has 3 seasons and 120 episodes. The show follows the main character Craig and his 2 friends Kelsey and JP as they, say it with me now, engage in shenanigans. Noticing a theme? This show finds a happy medium between Ed, Edd n Eddy and Clarence, as the setting is mostly within the woods around this creek. hence Craig of the Creek, and other places like Craig's house. I chose Craig of the Creek as my last show because I feel like the show has been able to perfectly modernize being a kid in suburbia. The show integrates technology perfectly in a show that is about kids playing in the woods without going on some damn tirade about how bad phones are for you or some shit like that. And trust me, it's a fucking refresher. It mentions school, but they never actually, to my knowledge, go to school. Much like Ed, Edd n Eddy, it seems to take place over perpetual, never-ending summer. There are weebs, there are witches. They got everything. Craig of the Creek, like the last two shows, shows the magical and innocent world of a suburban kid. This show is able to take what Ed, Edd n Eddy and Clarence do and perfect upon it. This is once again done through the role of the adults in the show. Craig's family is like the most accurate representation I have seen of a black middle-class family living in suburbia. I would know, because I'm from a black middle-class family in suburbia. Well, not anymore. I just moved out. Can you tell why I'm making this video? The adults once again only intervene when necessary, but are always somewhere in the background or at least talked about. Like I remember a month ago when I was in Texas in the hotel, you should watch that video, an episode of Craig of the Creek was on. The episode was about these teenagers who are all fucking weebs, and they all get stuck in their hideout, which is quite literally under a rock, and the rock falls and they get stuck there. So Craig tries to help them out, and his friends JP and Kelsey tell them like, why don't we just go get your mom? She's the only one home in the neighborhood for some reason. But he's like, no. If my mom has to come here and help me, she's not gonna let me come back to this creek, which is probably one of the most realistic depictions of a black mom I've ever fucking heard in my life. And that like anxiety of like not wanting to tell your mom about anything that happens. God forbid someone got hurt when we were playing outside as kids. God fucking forbid, because like having to go home and be like, Mom, I got hurt while I was playing outside, like she would never let you back outside. And I just remember laughing so hard when I watched that scene because it was just so fucking realistic. Craig of the Creek, like Ed, Edd n Eddy, also has its own economy and hierarchy. The kids are separated into tribes that constantly get into fights with each other over simple kid shit. It's great. Most issues, as stated before, are usually started and solved by children, with the more serious problems being brought to adults. I love the way that the show is able to integrate their lessons and themes into the show so seamlessly. There is an episode where Kelsey knocks a hole into Craig's house with her sword made of like PVC pipe, and it's taken away from her. Her father tells her that there are consequences to her actions and that she'll have to earn his trust back. This episode was able to show a lesson about the consequences of your actions while hiding it in this great quest that Kelsey has to go on to get her sword back. And I find that like really interesting. It is stuff like this that really makes me happy and nostalgic while watching a show that is far beyond my demographic by now. I don't know, it just makes me feel happy that there are still cartoons like this in the world, especially with the diversity and accuracy that it has. In my eyes, these three shows really encapsulate what it means to be a kid in suburbia, and over any other show that I watch that is far past my demographic by now, these three shows always seem to give me nostalgia, whether that's for something that I actually went through or something that I may have never actually experienced. And I think that's something really special. So here we are. I hope that any of this made some type of sense to you and I'm not just spouting nonsense like a mad conspiracy theorist rocking back and forth in the corner just muttering to themselves. An honorable mention I did want to touch on real quick was The Amazing World of Gumball. I feel like this show also somewhat fits into this category because despite having like no humans in it and most of the shenanigans being magical or otherworldly, I still feel like it somehow shows the suburban aesthetic pretty well. But if I were being honest, that show deserves its own video because that cartoon, in my opinion, is one of the greatest of all time. Maybe one day. Let me know if you want to see more of this content by liking and subbing and leaving a comment that you actually understood what the fuck I was talking about. Anyway, thanks, and I'll see you soon.